What's up, guys? Welcome back to another one. Ansel Linner. I've written a couple pieces here over the last few days on roguemacro.substack.com. These have been free posts, so make sure you guys are subscribed. There is paid content, paid tier, and that's a way to support my exploration of these topics. So one of my goals over the last few years has been to make a predictive model to help me forecast long-term trends. If I want to place my family in the proper location and position to flourish over the next 50 years, I want to know deeply what's going on in the world, what are the trends, where things are going. Now, to do that, I've developed a macro thesis, and over the years, I've drilled down to try to base this stuff in actual economics and philosophy. So I'm not a philosopher. I am an economist. So being an economist, you're somewhat of a philosopher, but I'm not a trained philosopher or anything. I'm amateur at this, but I have researched these ideas for hundreds and hundreds of hours. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of laying down the path of my exploration through these topics and how I think would be a good way to approach these things. Eventually, I want to write a book, very short summary, 100, 200 pages of this new school of economics. So anyway, let's get into this. Human systems versus human action. Mises describes the logic of action. I'm trying to describe the ontology of the actor, something he fought against. So we're going to dive into this term ontology and the philosophy behind the economics. This is all built up to have a complete system, hopefully from ground up, that is a new economics, but we will see how successful I am in that. Mises' philosophy is deeply Kantian. Kant argues there are two worlds: the phenomenal world, which is reality as it appears to us being filtered by the mind, and the noumenal world, which is reality itself. So we can never see the noumenal world. All we can ever access is filtered by the mind. We never encounter the noumenal world directly. What we experience is always reality as processed through the mind's built-in software, a priori. Categories like space, time, causation, objecthood, and identity. So these things Kant said we knew. We don't learn it, we just know it. 1 + 1 is 2. Okay, we have a concept of space. We have a concept of time. Now, Kant probably didn't know about African time, which was my latest piece on the blog post. You guys can check that out. But these are built in, okay? Things are, we recognize something as a thing. I hold up an object. I recognize that is an object. So some of these things are built into us. It's not necessarily learned. It's like our metaphysical programming that we have built into our heads. Okay, Kant does not say we live in an illusion. He says we can never know base reality, only reality as it appears after being shaped by the mind. Mises creates a parallel for action. He argues we can only know action, or economics, through a priori built-in software of ends, means, choice, cost, time, and uncertainty. We do not have access to deeper questions of action, only to how action appears through the lens of these a priori filters. So deeper questions of action would be, why are we doing that? We can't dig deeper. We just know that people do things according to these logical filters. That's the only way we can understand action, is through these a priori filters. This is summarized in his axiom: humans act purposefully with means toward a chosen aim. This is a metaphysical and epistemological claim. The metaphysical claim, what is that reality as experienced is always filtered. The epistemological claim is how we know. We know through a priori, or in other words, we just know. So reality is filtered through these items: ends, means, choice, cost, time, and uncertainty. And how do we know? We just know. because he can state it axiomatically, unfalsifiably, or to refute it is a contradiction. It's logic. Together, these moves deliberately subvert any ontological examination of the actor itself. What is the actor? Why do they believe this? Why do they act this way? Why are there groups of some people that act almost identically in certain respects versus other groups of people that act differently? We can't examine that under the umbrella of Austrian economics. So the question, what kind of thing is the actor, is bracketed out. So that's what ontology is. Ontology is, what kind of thing is this? What is metaphysical, and what kind of thing is it is ontological. The individual is treated as the irreducible unit of action. Mises does this intentionally to make his definition of economics immune to three intellectual threats of his era: psychologism, historicism, and positivism. And I go through the definitions of this. Of course, Marxism was the big one that he was fighting against. Postmodern. And how do you go against postmodernism? You use a Kantian framework. So I accept Mises' logic of action as a grammar of choice, an action. As Hayek pointed out already decades ago, this framework is not directly applicable to the real world. Since economics, according to Mises, is a purely logical system of action, anything that precedes action, such as value formation, belief formation, or cultural conditioning, must lie outside of economics. But of course, we want to know about this, right? We want to know why we value certain things. Why do we believe certain things? How does culture affect our actions? Because to have any sort of predictive power, you need to have an understanding of things that precede action, but we can't. We're told that is not part of economics. This effectively redefines economics as logic. It's no longer the study of trade, exchange, production, or historical economic systems. It is simply logic. Okay. Praxeology, therefore, does not replace positivism or historicism. It sidesteps them. If you accept praxeology and accept these logical claims of Mises, which I don't know how you cannot because they are logically sound, then you have to dismiss positivism and Marxism because they cannot be built on a praxeological foundation. They are methodologically incompatible. But what Mises does not give us in return is a theory of the real economic world as a process unfolding in time. So it's not applicable to the real world. The real world is a constantly evolving process. And Austrian economics does not tell us that. What it says is everything else equal, X will lead to Y. Okay, well, that's not the real world. In the real world, there is no such thing as ceteris paribus. That is a concept that is abstracted from a pure logic, not from a real world. And the real world is not pure logic. The real world might be logical. And in my case here, I would say it's a layered logic, but it's not strictly logical from an individual perspective. So it's not, Austrian School of Economics is not applicable to the real world. It's applicable, it's in theory it works, but in practice, it doesn't. Applying Austrian economics to reality requires what Mises himself calls judgment, which is subjective, right? And what is he building? He's building an objective logic. But his objective logic to apply to the real world then becomes subjective. In Mises' system, the individual mind is the locus of logic. Since economics is defined as a logical system, the individual is by definition the irreducible unit. One might say, my hand acts, not me. So my hand is what pinched or grabbed. Not me, my hand did it. But that's ruled out immediately because the hand cannot reason. The individual does, only the person does. But I don't think that's the case. I think there's more logic, and we will see here in a second. I do not dispute this at the level of responsibility. So the problem with ruling out individualism is saying that a group is to blame or a culture is to blame or something else, not the individual. So I'm not going to prosecute you because, oh, you aren't to blame. It's actually society that's to blame. No, you have to have individual responsibility and apply, because that's the only practical unit. So if you want to punish a group, you're getting into very troubling waters, right? For my case here, I accept that that's the level of responsibility. The individual is the morally and practically responsible unit of action. There's no other thing that you can really practically punish or hold responsible. But responsibility does not imply simplicity. An entity can be the locus of action while still being the product of a complex causal structure. What's missing is an ontology of the actor. And going back up here, ontology was what kind of thing is the actor? So that's what we need to talk about. Hayek moved partway in this direction. He wrote about cultural evolution, institutions as selection systems, and the distributed nature of knowledge. I am going further. I am claiming that there are multiple real logics operating at different levels. Evolutionary logic, genetic logic, which are kind of the same thing, cultural logic, institutional logic, and environmental logic. Now, what are those things? So let's go through a few examples. So evolutionary logic, this and genetic logic, these things can cover a vast array. I mean, this is evolutionary psychology is part way to look at this. It's also built in subconscious reactions. So fear, snakes, fear of snakes, bugs, spiders, rodents, whatever. There's a built-in fear of these things. You're not thinking about them; they just happen. All right, but they're happening for evolutionary reason. There's also things like status seeking or hierarchy formation. So we know that human societies naturally form hierarchies, and people might want to climb the hierarchy. They might want to get in where they fit in. Well, where do you fit in this hierarchy? How do you know that's where you fit? There's a lot of subconscious cues that go on, subconscious communication, body language, other things. And, we kind of know what we want, but we don't know why we necessarily want those things. Everybody wants to be high status or rich. And why do we want to be that? Because we think maybe, we rationalize and we say, oh, because our troubles will go away. But that's not necessarily why we want those things. We want those things for evolutionary reason so that we can have more successful reproduction. Okay, so these are evolutionary and genetic logic that do have their own logic to them. There's also things like tribalism and in-group bias. And this is built into a large degree. You want your family or your kin group or even your tribe to succeed because that will have a genetic or evolutionary advantage. Okay. So this does have a logic to it, and it's not purely an individual logic, right? Let's go do some environmental logic here. So this would be the environment actually selects different strategies that are even viable at all. There is a feasible set of strategies for any culture or institution to take in a certain environment. So, for example, desert societies, they tend to be nomadic, militaristic or martial honor-based. The land doesn't support dense agriculture, so they have mobility. There's raiding parties. They don't care necessarily about property law. They care about being mobile. River societies, they're bureaucratic and centralized. Disease ecology of an area. So if it's highly stricken by malaria, or there's like tsetse flies or something else, you'll tend to have low population density and weak states. And those things affect the way you live and the decisions you make. So you make this certain decision, or people in your area, in your culture, in your clan, tend to make similar choices, economic choices of the individual. These choices are hyper constrained, and not by the individual. They're constrained by the environment. So that it would be an environmental logic and cultural logic. This is a big one. And you can tell when I'm starting to talk about some of these other things, cultural logic always seeps in. So these are just selected for behaviors and norms and institutions that help the group persist and that bracket out or constrain your actions. Some of these things might be Protestant work ethic as well. So that is delayed gratification, reinvestment, discipline. You aren't necessarily choosing that as an individual. You're born into that those cultural norms, and they're instilled into you. So this is more than the individual. This is the culture that is forming your preferences, which we are not allowed to ask in Austrian economics. Let's see, honor cultures in pastoral or frontier societies, Confucian culture, taboos against food, sex, behavior, all those things. So all of these different logics are stacking up into a layered ontology of what the actor is. I hope this is starting to make a little sense. So all of these factors go beyond the individual, and they interact with each other in different layers and different forces, different directions. And what is the result of that is a individual. The phenomenological expression of these multiple deeper systems. By phenomenological expression, I mean the form a thing takes as it is experienced in the phenomenal world. In my framework, an individual is biology, instincts, culture, habits, history, and environments interacting together. Phenomenologically, that appears as a person. The actor is not a primitive. The actor is a phenotype. By phenotype, I mean the outward manifestation of a thing. A genotype is the blueprint. The phenotype is the building. And I would say a genotype would be your genes. That's why it's genotype. And a phenotype is your body. So your body is the outward manifestation of the thing, which is your genes. Groups and institutions. Individuals are the cells of culture. Groups and institutions are its organs. Memes are viruses, and environment is the nutrition. And once the actor is no longer treated as irreducible, history stops being a mystery and starts being a system. Okay, so that was my post here. Human systems versus human action. Diving into Mises versus my new school of economics based on human systems instead of human action. Check out roguemacro.substack.com. Become a free member at least, or you can sign up to become a paid member and support my work. Always appreciate it. Do have a community on Telegram. You can find those links down in the description to this video. So appreciate you guys. All right, that's it for this one, guys. I'll be back shortly with my next episode. Bye.